It was a warm summer afternoon, and Officer Karen McAllister drove her patrol car through the quiet streets of Willow Heights. The suburban neighborhood was known for its pristine lawns, expensive homes, and upscale businesses. Karen, a veteran officer, had seen it all, or so she believed. Her sharp eyes scanned the streets, always on the lookout for anything she thought looked out of place. As she turned onto a busy street, her attention was drawn to a black woman stepping out of a sleek black car. The woman, dressed in a crisp white blazer and navy slacks, walked confidently toward a tall, glass-fronted office building. Karen frowned. Something about the woman's confidence annoyed her. Karen immediately assumed the worst. Karen parked her patrol car on the curb and stepped out. Adjusting her uniform and straightening her belt, she approached the woman, her heels clicking on the pavement. "Excuse me, ma'am," Karen said, her voice sharp and authoritative. The woman stopped and turned, her face calm but curious. "Yes, officer. Is there a problem?" the woman asked, her tone polite. Karen crossed her arms. "Can I ask what you're doing here?" The woman tilted her head slightly, as if trying to understand the question. "I'm on my way to a meeting." "Is there something wrong?" Karen's eyes narrowed. "This is private property. Do you have permission to be here? Do you have ID on you?" The woman raised an eyebrow, but kept her composure. "This is a business district, and I have an appointment. I don't believe I'm trespassing." Karen didn't like the answer. Her tone grew firmer. "I need to see your ID. Now." The woman sighed, reaching into her bag and pulling out a sleek wallet. She handed Karen her driver's license. Karen glanced at the ID, barely looking at the name before handing it back. "This doesn't explain why you're here," Karen snapped. "You're acting suspicious." "Suspicious," the woman repeated, her calm expression unwavering. "Officer, I'm here for a meeting. If you need to verify anything, you're welcome to do so." But Karen wasn't interested in verifying anything. To her, the woman's confidence felt like defiance, and it irritated her. Without further explanation, Karen reached for her radio. "We have a possible trespassing suspect," she said, her voice loud enough for the woman to hear. "I'm bringing her in." The woman blinked, surprised but not rattled. "Is this necessary, officer? I haven't done anything wrong." Karen ignored her. "Turn around," she ordered. "Hands behind your back." There were a few people walking by, and they stopped to watch. A couple whispered to each other, confused about what was happening. The woman hesitated, but after a moment, she complied, holding her head high even as Karen handcuffed her. As Karen led her to the patrol car, the woman calmly said, "You're making a mistake." Karen smirked. "We'll see about that." The woman didn't argue further. She stepped into the back seat of the patrol car with dignity, her expression unreadable. Inside the precinct, Karen felt smug about her arrest, but she had no idea who the woman really was or how much trouble she had just brought upon herself. The ride to the police station was tense but quiet. Karen glanced in the rearview mirror occasionally, expecting her suspect to break down or start arguing. Instead, the woman sat silently, her posture straight and her face calm. Karen couldn't understand it. Most people in this situation would be panicking or pleading their case. But this woman, she looked like she was waiting for something. When they arrived at the station, Karen parked the patrol car and opened the back door. The woman stepped out gracefully, as if she weren't in handcuffs at all. Karen led her through the station, her heels clicking on the tiled floor. A few officers looked up from their desks as they passed. Some gave Karen questioning looks, but she ignored them. Karen brought the woman to the processing desk and started filling out the paperwork. "Name?" Karen asked, not bothering to look up. The woman raised an eyebrow. "It's on the ID I gave you." Karen stopped writing and glared at her. "I'm asking you now." "Amelia Johnson," the woman replied smoothly. Karen wrote it down, then glanced at her. "Do you have any prior arrests?" Amelia's lips curled into a small smile. "No." I don't usually find myself in situations like this. Karen rolled her eyes. Well, there's a first time for everything. Another officer approached the desk, a young man with a kind face. He glanced at Amelia, then at Karen. Hey, is everything okay? What's the charge here? Trespassing, Karen said firmly. She was on private property without permission. The young officer frowned. Are you sure about that? This seems unusual. Karen shot him a sharp look. I'm sure. Amelia stayed silent, her expression calm but watchful. She seemed to be studying the room, taking note of every face and every detail. When Karen finished the paperwork, she gestured for Amelia to follow her to the holding area. Do I get to make a phone call? Amelia asked as they walked. Karen smirked. You'll get your chance, but don't expect anyone to come running. Amelia didn't respond. She stepped into the small holding cell with a quiet dignity that unsettled Karen. Once the cell door clanged shut, Amelia sat on the bench inside, crossing her legs neatly. Karen couldn't help but notice how out of place she looked. Everything about her, the expensive clothes, the composed attitude, felt wrong for a holding cell. But Karen brushed off the feeling. As Karen walked away, another officer approached her, the same young man from earlier. Karen, he said in a low voice, are you sure about this? I think I recognize her. Karen frowned. What are you talking about? I've seen her on TV or something, he said, lowering his voice even more. I think she's someone important. Karen scoffed. Yeah, sure. Everyone thinks they're important when they're in trouble. The young officer looked uneasy but didn't press further. Meanwhile, Amelia sat quietly in the cell, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't look worried. If anything, she looked like someone waiting for the perfect moment to speak. Karen walked back to her desk, still confident she'd made the right call. But deep down, a small, nagging feeling started to creep in. Who was this woman, really? Back at the station, Karen sat at her desk, sorting through the paperwork from earlier. Her mind kept wandering back to Amelia, the calmness in her eyes, the way she held herself even when handcuffed. Karen couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right about the whole situation, but she didn't have time to dwell on it. She had more important things to focus on. As Karen reviewed her notes, Officer Davis, the young officer who had spoken to her earlier, approached her desk again. He had a hesitant look on his face, and he was glancing at Amelia's holding cell. Karen, I'm not sure if this is important, but he started. Karen looked up from her papers, irritated. What is it, Davis? I've got a lot of work to do. I think I've seen the woman before, Davis said, scratching his head. She might be someone important. I don't know. Maybe on the news or something. Karen rolled her eyes. You're imagining things. You're probably thinking of someone else. She's just another person trying to get out of a ticket or something. But Davis didn't look convinced. He kept glancing at Amelia's cell, unsure of what to do. I'm just saying, Karen, it might be worth checking. Karen sighed. She didn't like being questioned, especially not about her decisions. I don't need anyone second-guessing me, Davis, she snapped. She's a trespasser, and that's all there is to it. Davis hesitated before walking away. Karen watched him go, a small twinge of doubt creeping into her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this woman than she let on. Back at the holding cell, Amelia was still sitting quietly. She hadn't said a word since Karen left her there. In fact, she hadn't even asked for a lawyer yet, which struck Karen as odd. Most people in this situation would be calling their lawyer by now. But Amelia didn't seem in a hurry at all. It was almost as if she was waiting for something to happen, waiting for someone to figure out who she really was. As Karen paced around her desk, trying to focus on the task at hand, her phone buzzed. It was a message from one of the officers who had been working in the back. Karen, you might want to check this out. We just ran that woman's name, and it came up with a hit. You won't believe who she is. Karen froze. She quickly opened the message, reading it with widening eyes. The name Amelia Johnson wasn't just a regular name. It was the name of a state senator. The same woman who had been arrested for trespassing was a powerful, well-known political figure. Karen felt a sinking feeling in her stomach. She stood up quickly, looking over at Davis, who was now talking with a couple of other officers. "Where's the woman? I need to speak with her now," Karen said, her voice sharp. Davis rushed to the holding area. He had also just learned the news and seemed just as shocked as Karen. He quickly unlocked the cell and stepped back, letting Karen enter. Amelia stood up when she saw Karen approaching, her face now showing a hint of recognition. "You should have told me who you were," Karen said, her tone more cautious now. "You could have avoided all this trouble." Amelia raised an eyebrow, her expression still calm. "I didn't feel the need to," she replied. "But now that you know, what are you going to do?" Karen didn't know how to respond. She was still processing the fact that she had arrested a state senator, but Amelia's quiet confidence was making her feel uneasy. Karen stood in front of the holding cell, feeling the weight of her mistake pressing down on her. Amelia Johnson, the woman she had just arrested for trespassing, wasn't just an ordinary person. She was a state senator, a leader in the community, someone who had the power to make decisions that affected many lives. Amelia stood tall in front of Karen, her expression calm as ever, as if the arrest was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. But Karen couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to spiral out of control. She'd made a huge error, and now she was starting to see the full scope of it. "Amelia Johnson, senator from the state," Karen muttered under her breath as she glanced at the paperwork again. "I can't believe this." Amelia tilted her head, a slight smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Yes, that's me," she said, her voice even. "And now do you know why I didn't feel the need to explain myself earlier?" Karen took a step back, unsure of what to say. She had just arrested a powerful figure, and the situation was only going to get worse from here. Her mind raced as she tried to think of a way to fix this. Karen started, but her words caught in her throat. She didn't know what she could say to make up for what had just happened. Amelia, sensing Karen's discomfort, spoke up. "Look, I understand this is a mistake, but I'm not angry at you. I think you were just doing your job, right?" Karen glanced at Amelia, surprised by her calmness. Most people in this situation would have been furious, but Amelia seemed almost detached, as if she was used to this kind of attention. Or maybe she had already seen it all before. "I was doing my job," Karen said, trying to maintain some professionalism, though she could hear the doubt creeping into her voice. Amelia nodded slowly. "I get that. But you made a mistake. And now, I think we both know this is going to cause a lot of trouble. For both of us." Karen's stomach tightened. She could already imagine the media storm that would follow. She had no idea what would happen to her career after this. Arresting a state senator, especially one with as much power as Amelia, was not going to go unnoticed. The higher-ups would find out. The public would find out. "What happens now?" Karen asked, her voice shaky. Amelia smiled again, but this time it wasn't a reassuring smile. "Now we deal with the consequences. For you and for me." Just then, the police chief, a middle-aged man named Chief Daniels, walked into the room. He looked from Karen to Amelia, and then back at Karen, his brow furrowing. "What's going on here, McAllister? I just got the call." Karen opened her mouth to explain, but Amelia spoke before she could. "I think it's clear, Chief," she said, her voice steady. "I'm Amelia Johnson. I was arrested by Officer McAllister here for something I didn't do." The chief's eyes widened. "Wait, what?" Amelia took a deep breath, clearly trying to remain patient. "It's a misunderstanding, but I'll need to speak to someone higher up about this. I'm sure this won't be the last time we talk about it." Karen stood there, frozen, unsure of what to do next. The chief turned his attention to her, his face serious. "McAllister, you should have verified who she was before you made the arrest. This is a mess." Karen nodded silently, her mind racing with thoughts of the fallout she was about to face. The next morning, the news spread quickly. It didn't take long for word of Amelia Johnson's arrest to reach every corner of the city. A local reporter was the first to break the story, and within hours, social media was buzzing with reactions. Headlines screamed about a powerful state senator being arrested by a police officer for trespassing. Karen sat in her car outside the station, staring blankly at her phone. The notifications kept flooding in, one after another. There were messages from friends, from family, and from strangers who were all commenting on the incident. Some were supportive, others critical, but all of them had one thing in common. They knew about Amelia Johnson now. Karen's hands gripped the steering wheel as her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from her sister. "Are you okay? I just saw the news. What happened?" Karen quickly typed a reply. "It was a mistake. I didn't know who she was. I didn't mean for this to happen." But deep down, Karen knew that the damage was done. This wasn't just another arrest. Amelia Johnson wasn't just anyone. She was a state senator, a woman who had been on television, giving speeches, making decisions that affected thousands of lives. Now, Karen had arrested her for something as simple as trespassing, and everyone was going to know about it. Back at the station, Chief Daniels was holding a meeting with several officers, including Karen. The room was tense, and everyone's eyes were on her. Karen sat quietly, her face flushed with embarrassment as the chief spoke. "This situation is already out of control," Chief Daniels said, pacing back and forth in front of them. "You've caused a lot of trouble, McAllister, and now we have to deal with the fallout." Karen nodded, barely able to look anyone in the eye. She knew that her career was on the line. She had been a police officer for years, but now, with the media storm swirling around her, she wasn't sure what would happen next. "Do you understand the gravity of this, McAllister?" Chief Daniels continued. "We need to handle this with care. There are people in the city who are already calling for your resignation. There are even rumors of protests." Karen could feel the weight of his words. Protests. People calling for her to step down. She had never imagined it would come to this. She had made a huge mistake, and now it was out there for the world to see. Just then, a few officers entered the room. They were carrying news reports and social media screenshots. Everyone in the room had been following the story, and now it was impossible to ignore. "This is bad, Karen," one of the officers said. "The community is outraged. You need to be ready for what's coming." Karen sat back in her chair, staring at the floor. She didn't know what to say. She hadn't expected her mistake to spiral out of control like this. She had thought it would just be another routine arrest. But now, it was so much more. Back at the precinct, Amelia was handling things in her own way. She had already given a statement to the press, calmly explaining that the arrest had been a misunderstanding. She was graceful, even in the face of what had happened, and the media ate it up. Reporters were quick to point out that Amelia's calm demeanor was the perfect response to the police officer's mistake. But Amelia wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for the thousands of people who had been mistreated by police. She was using this moment to shed light on the bigger picture. Her message wasn't just about her. It was about the need for reform. Karen couldn't help but feel a growing sense of regret. She had made a simple mistake, but it was quickly turning into a lesson she would never forget. Karen sat in her office, staring at her desk, feeling the weight of the situation pressing on her shoulders. The news was all over the city, the state, and even national news. Amelia Johnson's arrest had quickly become a topic of heated debate. People were talking about it everywhere. Some were defending Karen, while others were calling for her resignation. The public's reaction was mixed, but the reality was clear. Karen's mistake had huge consequences. Chief Daniels called her into his office that afternoon. Karen walked in slowly, her heart pounding. She had no idea what to expect. The meeting was going to be difficult. "Sit down, McAllister," the chief said, his voice firm but calm. Karen sat down across from him, feeling a knot form in her stomach. She had worked for the police department for years, but now she wasn't sure if she had a future here. The chief sighed and rubbed his forehead. "You've caused quite a mess, McAllister. We're getting calls from the mayor's office, the media, and even the governor. They want answers. They want action. And we have to figure out how to handle this." Karen nodded quietly. She knew this was coming. She had made a mistake, a big mistake, but she wasn't prepared for the way it was affecting everything. "Your actions have reflected poorly on this department," Chief Daniels continued. "The community is questioning our judgment, and the public is angry. This situation is getting worse, and we need to act quickly." Karen's stomach turned. She had hoped for a chance to fix things, to explain herself, but it felt like things were spiraling out of control. She didn't know how to fix this. "There's going to be an internal investigation," the chief said. "We need to make sure this doesn't happen again, and we need to know how you're going to handle this moving forward." Karen's heart sank. She had been hoping for a second chance, but it looked like the department was already thinking about the future. She couldn't blame them. Her mistake had put the entire department in a difficult position. "I understand," Karen said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll cooperate with the investigation. I'll do whatever it takes." The chief nodded, but his expression remained serious. "You'll have to take responsibility for your actions. That's the first step. We're also going to have to review your performance and decide whether or not you're fit to continue in this role." Karen nodded again, trying to hold back the emotions building inside her. She had worked hard to get where she was, but it felt like it was all falling apart in an instant. She had never imagined that one mistake could cost her everything. "There's also going to be a meeting with the media tomorrow," the chief added. "You'll need to be prepared to explain what happened. I suggest you be honest about the situation and take full responsibility for your actions. Anything less will only make it worse." Karen felt a wave of dread wash over her. A press conference. The thought of facing the cameras and answering questions about her mistake made her stomach churn. She had never been good at handling the media, and now she had to face them head-on. "Understood," Karen said, her voice flat. "I'll do my best." As she left the chief's office, Karen couldn't help but feel the weight of everything on her shoulders. The road ahead would be tough. The investigation, the media, the public reaction. It all felt like too much to handle, but she knew she had no choice but to face it head-on. The consequences of her mistake were just beginning to unfold, and there was no turning back now. The press conference was set for the following day. Karen could hardly sleep the night before, her mind racing with thoughts of what she would say. She knew the media would be unforgiving, and the weight of her mistake still hung heavy in her chest. But she had to face it. There was no way around it now. When she arrived at the police station the next morning, the atmosphere was tense. News vans were parked outside, and reporters stood in groups, ready to pounce as soon as anyone stepped outside. Karen took a deep breath, reminding herself that she had to do the right thing. She had to own up to her mistake. Inside the conference room, Chief Daniels stood at the podium, surrounded by the press. Amelia Johnson, the state senator, was also present. She had agreed to speak, and her calm, graceful presence made Karen feel even more nervous. Amelia had handled the situation with dignity and poise, using the spotlight to advocate for reform in the police department. Now, Karen would have to find her own way to do the same. "Karen," Chief Daniels said, motioning for her to stand by his side. "It's your turn." Karen walked up to the microphone, her hands slightly trembling. She took a deep breath and began. "Good morning," she started, her voice steady but softer than she wanted. "My name is Officer Karen McAllister, and I stand before you today to address the arrest of State Senator Amelia Johnson. I made a mistake, a big one, and I take full responsibility for my actions." The cameras clicked and flashed, but Karen kept her focus on the crowd. The reporters were quiet, waiting for her to continue. "I arrested Senator Johnson without verifying her identity," she said, her voice growing stronger. I acted out of my own assumptions, and I failed to do my job the way I should have. This is not the kind of officer I want to be. It's not the kind of police department we want to be. I'm deeply sorry for my actions." Karen paused, glancing over at Amelia. The senator gave her a small nod, encouraging her to continue. "I know that this mistake has hurt the trust between the police and the community," Karen continued. "And I know that I have a lot of work to do to rebuild that trust, not just with you, but with myself as well." She could hear the murmurs from the crowd, but she didn't let them distract her. She knew she had to be honest. "I've learned a lot from this experience. I've learned about the importance of questioning my own biases, the importance of being fair, and the importance of treating everyone with respect, no matter who they are. I've also learned that there is a greater need for reform within the police department. I support the work that Senator Johnson is doing to improve how we serve our communities." Amelia stepped up to the microphone next, her voice calm and clear. "I want to thank Officer McAllister for taking responsibility for her actions," Amelia said. "It's not easy to admit when we've made mistakes, but that's how change begins. We need to have honest conversations about accountability and the need for reform, both within the police force and in our society as a whole." Karen listened quietly as Amelia spoke, feeling a sense of relief. Amelia wasn't angry at her. Instead, she was using this moment to highlight the importance of growth, learning, and change. "Thank you," Amelia concluded. "I hope this serves as a reminder that we all have a role to play in making our world better. We must work together to ensure that our justice system serves everyone equally." After the press conference, Karen felt the weight in her chest lighten. The road ahead would still be tough, but she felt hopeful. It wasn't going to be easy, but this was her chance to make things right. The days following the press conference were challenging for Karen. She spent her time answering questions from the media, meeting with the department's leadership, and working to regain her colleagues' trust. The department had launched an internal investigation, and Karen had to face the consequences of her actions. But through it all, one thing became clear. She was determined to learn from her mistake and become better. The media continued to report on the incident, but Karen felt a shift. Instead of focusing on the mistake she had made, people began to notice her willingness to own up to it. Some of the public began to respect her for taking responsibility, and others saw her as a symbol of what could happen when people truly acknowledged their errors. In the weeks that followed, Karen worked closely with the police department's reform task force. She attended meetings about improving diversity training, creating better relationships between the community and the police, and ensuring officers treated everyone fairly. The discussions weren't always easy, but Karen found herself learning a lot about herself, about the work that needed to be done, and about how she could contribute to that change. At home, Karen had quiet moments of reflection. She thought about how she had once believed she was doing everything right, following the rules without questioning them. But now she understood the importance of questioning assumptions and recognizing her own biases. It wasn't about just following procedures. It was about understanding the people they affected. Amelia Johnson, the state senator, had become a regular figure in the media as well. Her calm, measured response to the entire situation had earned her respect from people across the state. She continued to push for police reform, using the incident as a platform to speak about the need for change in law enforcement. Amelia made it clear that her goal wasn't to tear down the police force, but to build a better system, one that served and protected all people equally. One afternoon, Karen received a phone call from Amelia. The call caught her off guard, but she was grateful for it. "Hello," Karen answered, still surprised. "It's Amelia," the voice on the other end said, warm and friendly. "I just wanted to thank you again for how you've handled everything. I know this hasn't been easy, but I see the change in you. I see the growth, and I appreciate it." Karen felt a weight lift from her chest. "Thank you, Senator," she replied. "I can't tell you how much I've learned from this. I'm committed to doing better, to being better." "I can see that," Amelia said. And that's what matters. It's not about being perfect, it's about trying. I believe you're on the right path. Karen smiled, grateful for the words. Thank you. I won't let this be in vain. Over the next few months, Karen continued her work with the Reform Task Force. She went to community meetings, speaking with residents about how they could improve relations between the police and the people they served. It wasn't always easy. Some people were still angry, still hurt. But Karen didn't give up. She kept showing up, kept listening, and kept working. As for the department, changes began to take shape. New policies were put in place. More training on bias, diversity, and de-escalation was introduced. And slowly, things started to improve. Karen knew it would take time, but she felt hopeful. In the end, Karen realized that one mistake didn't define her. What mattered was what she did next. She was no longer the officer who made the wrong call. She was the officer who chose to learn, to grow, and to be part of the solution. And that, she knew, was the true measure of progress.